Hi, Lynton here, and this is Sketch and Tell. Out of all the animals and birds and sea creatures we have in Australia, I particularly like our birds, from our little blue wren right through to our striding emus. I like to seek them out, to observe them, if I can, in nature, and capture something of their personality on canvas. But it's the parrots that we abound in Australia. We have nearly, up to 40 to 50 different species, depending on how you categorise them. But the ones I really love are the cockatoos. That brilliant white plumage that they show off, the sulphur yellow crest they have on the top. They are an amazing bird. Let me just share a few interesting facts about cockatoos. If you have the opportunity to rear one from birth, to hand feed it, to look after it, they are known sometimes as a Velcro bird because they form a strong attachment to their owner. They are one of the most affectionate of the parrot species, and they crave attention. They love to be petted, and they love to be near you or sitting on you. So if you have one, you need to be willing to spend at least 2 hours a day petting them, giving them attention, and you need to keep in mind that they can live up to 80 years and they will want to stay with you for a lifetime. The other thing about cockatoos is, even though they are a beautiful bird, they do have a naughty side or a naughty streak to them. They love to chew things with their powerful beaks. They love to destroy things. So if you have a cage, perhaps made out of wood or plastic, they will get into it and they will chew it to pieces. They will love chewing furniture. They love chewing the wood sills around windows. So again, you need to provide toys for them to keep them occupied, and just be mindful of that. The other thing, as we do know, that cockatoos are very loud and raucous, particularly in the mornings and the afternoons, which is when they love to screech in the wild. So again, if you have neighbours, you need to check with them first that it's okay if you want to have a cockatoo at home. Out in the wild, it's the loud noise that would often be a warning sound. So when the flock of cockatoos is on the ground eating seeds, there'll be one up in a high tree, a gum tree, called the lookout. And if that cockatoo sees any danger approaching, it will let out that screech, and the other cockatoos will rise up very quickly, very noisily. The beak on the cockatoo, we'll get to that now, is again a very powerful beak, and it also is unique in that the bottom part of the beak, at the end of it, it is shaped like a shovel. It's scooped out, which means that when it clamps down on something, it has what we call a three-way bite, and it can exert extreme power on branches, on food, and your fingers. So you need to be mindful of that. Just fix that beak up, add a little bit more to it. The cockatoo also is what we call dimorphic. It's very hard to tell the difference between a male and a female. It is sometimes just maybe the size of the bird. The male might be slightly bigger, but it's more often the eyes, and this is where you need to look carefully at the eye. And a female's eye will be slightly lighter. The male will have a darker eye. But it doesn't really matter. Whatever you call your cockatoo, they will respond, and all they care about is being close to you. Also, the crest of the cockatoo, that signature top of the cockatoo, that those yellow feathers that I often love to collect if I see one on the ground. For me, that's like a jewel, and I like to just look at it, and I have some in my car. But this crest, when they stick it up, it is a way to kind of tell how they're feeling. The hard part is discerning what they're trying to tell you, because they can put that crest up when they are excited, they can put it up in a greeting, they can put it up as a warning, they can just simply put it up if they're curious or showing off. But when you spend some time with your cockatoo, you can actually start to work out what they are trying to tell you. Now, out of all the cockatoos, I'd like to tell you about one that really stands out in my mind. I'd like to take you back to Queensland, where I grew up, and there was, up on the north coast of Queensland, we call that the Sunshine Coast, there was a friend of mine whom, when I headed north, I used to like dropping into his place and to spend some time with him. His name was Raphael, which is a very good name because Raphael was an artist and I used to love looking at his artwork. He also was someone who was very compassionate with creatures. He had an old Queensland house that he lived in, which was up on stilts, and that house was always filled with and surrounded with all sorts of creatures. There were dogs and cats and birds, and there were chooks, and there were often animals that he would bring in whom no one else wanted, and he would care for them. One weekend I went to visit Raph, and I found that he had a new addition to his animal menagerie. It was a cockatoo. Now, Raph had heard that in the nearby village, coastal town, there was an animal refuge, and that there was a number of cockatoos there. In fact, they had been reared by hand from a clutch of eggs. And as those little cockatoos grew and lost their fluffy white down and started to grow those beautiful white feathers that, again, are just so unique to the cockatoo, and those yellow feathers on the top, it was actually quite easy for them to find various homes that would adopt them. But there was one that nobody wanted. And my friend Raph, when he heard about this, he made his way to that refuge, and I'm now going to draw what this cockatoo looks like. This cockatoo, when it started to grow along with the others, was missing a very vital part of what it means to be a beautiful cockatoo. He had no feathers. Now, they worked out, after observing and testing, that it wasn't because of any skin disease, it wasn't because of any stress, it was not because this cockatoo was pulling them out. This cockatoo just did not grow them at all. Whatever bit of the DNA grows cockatoo feathers, this guy missed the boat. And he was never going to grow them, and because of that, nobody wanted to take him home. And they were even thinking of perhaps putting this cockatoo down. Until my friend saw him and just said, "I love this guy. I want to give him a home." So Raph took him back to his house, cleaned out an old chook shed so that during the night time this cockatoo could live in there safely and nest down in the straw. But during the daytime, this cockatoo was allowed to roam free around not only the outside of the house but inside. Now, if you had a cockatoo like this, and I'm going to just put a few more of the bits of fluff that this guy just had on his body, it was almost like somebody had swept the floor and kind of tried to stick bits of fluff back on as an excuse for feathers. But if you had a cockatoo like this, what would you call this cockatoo? Now, we could be very mean or rude and call him Baldy or Scrawny, but my friend gave him a special name. He called him Shaun Quill. Now, that can be understood in two ways. It can be just a name. "Hello, Shaun, how are you going?" "Hello, not too bad." But it can also be understood as this. When you shear a sheep and you take the wool off. You have shorn that sheep. You have removed the fleece. And another word, of course, for feather is quill. So my friend was saying, look, I know that you are shorn of all your quills. Your feathers aren't going to grow, but that's okay. Here, I accept you for who you are. I want you to know that you're safe here, and I really care about you just the way you are. Now, as I got to know Shaun Quill over that weekend, I started to see beyond the exterior of Shaun Quill and to realise there's an amazing personality there. First of all, Shaun was extremely curious and clever and smart. He would often follow me around, and I would look around, and there he would be, just sort of with his head tilted over, looking at me with those great big eyes. He would often try to have a bit of a talk with me, a few sort of screeches, and every now and then a word would come out. He was very smart, but not only that, Shaun was also quite funny, and he would, give me an example. When I was hanging out the washing one day on an old line with a piece of wire, Shaun came out, hooked his big claws around the washing line and started to swing around, to loop the loops, screeching his head off. He was really showing off, having a great time. But not only that, Shaun also had a bit of a, dare I say it, he was a bit of a tease. One morning, it was a hot Saturday, I was there. I was under the house just looking out across the backyard. There was a big old mango tree there, and one of the dogs that lived at this house, his name was Roger. He was an old Labrador. He was asleep under the mango tree. It was very hot and humid. And little Shaun beside me looked out across at Roger and then started going, "Roger, Roger, Roger!" And Roger pricked his ears up and he looked at me and he went, "Ugh," and he sort of slowly came over and looked at me. "Yeah, well, what do you want?" I kind of just said it wasn't me, it was Shaun. Roger gave me a dirty look and went back and lay down under the mango tree again and Shaun waited till he's asleep, and then off he went again. "Roger, Roger, Roger!" He really got me into trouble that day. Now, as I thought about Shaun, believe it or not, I actually started to see a little bit of myself in him. Not that I look like a cockatoo, but I started to think about that period in my life when I was at school, particularly the early years of high school, where I would often look at myself in the mirror, or just the way I thought about myself, and I would come to the conclusion that I'm just a scrawny nobody. I would compare myself to others, and I would think to myself that they are more gifted than I. They're better sports people than I. They're more brainy than I am. What am I? I'm a nothing. I craved for affection and attention from others in all sorts of ways that were not really good or healthy. And when you have that view of yourself, it takes you to a really dark place. It took me a long time to realise that there, in fact, was someone else, like my friend Raphael. Someone else who saw me with very different eyes. I would call that someone else the significant other, with a capital O. I'm talking about God here. And I started to realise and come to an awareness deep down within that God saw me in a very different way than I saw myself. That God looked beyond the exterior. God doesn't care about what we look like or what we have achieved or not achieved or whether we've messed up or not. God sees you for who you really are, deep down within. And he sees something special there, something unique. And he wants us to understand that and to value that. And when you start to go on that journey, it is really like finding a safe place that you can live in. And it is truly a journey of starting to discover who you really are and not trying to copy someone else or compare yourself to someone else. Let's quickly get back to Shaun. On the last day I was there, my friend Raphael took me out under the house and asked me a question. He said, "Lynton, what is it, the one thing that Shaun can't do on his own?" And I said, "Well, that's easy. He can't fly." And my friend said, "Well, Lynton, I am going to try to fulfill that dream for Shaun. He can't do it on his own, so let me show you what I'm making. And he showed me a beautiful soft leather vest that he had made that fits around the body of Shaun. There were two little holes where his scrawny little wings would fit through, and on the back there were some attachments. And he told me that he was going to put some fishing line to those attachments, and at the other end he was going to attach it to a kite, a very big kite. Now he was still experimenting on what kites would be most suited and safest, which would carry Shaun Quill, and yet he told me when that day comes and when the conditions are right, he's going to put Shaun in that little vest, attach him to the kite, and he's going to fly him high in the sky so that Shaun can experience what it's like to fly. And as I drove home that weekend, I thought to myself again, that is just like God. God has dreams for you and I. God takes great pleasure in fulfilling those dreams, even though we might not know what they are or have any idea how they're going to be worked out. But that's the kind of God that we have on our side, working in and through us. And I'd like to finish with a reading which comes from one of my favourite psalms, which is Psalm 139. And the writer of this psalm had this sense that this is how God looked at him. So let me finish by reading. For you, the psalmist is addressing his sense of God's presence in his life. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand on the beach. For all those who might feel like you're a little bit scrawny, may you know God's incredible love towards you and his many precious thoughts. Thank you.